Maira Norris walked briskly into the airport, rolling a modest carry-on behind her. The early morning sun filtered through the large glass windows of Terminal B, casting warm rays across the polished floor. Travelers bustled around her, some pacing with coffee, others standing half asleep in long security lines. She had always loved airports, not for the chaos, but for the sense of movement. Possibility. Freedom. Today, she was headed to Austin for a leadership summit, her first invitation as a speaker, not just an attendee. She had rehearsed her speech for days. Her father had even helped her practice, offering tips between his own schedule of interviews and charity appearances. But none of that was on her mind now. She just needed to get through security. She was early, as always. Her boarding pass was ready, passport in hand, hair neatly tied back in a braid. Dressed in a navy blue hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, she looked like any other young adult traveler, maybe a little more poised. Her father raised her to treat people with respect, and she carried that principle with her wherever she went. When she reached the security line, a uniformed staff member waved her forward. She smiled and handed over her passport and mobile boarding pass. The agent glanced at them, then paused. His brow furrowed. Maira tilted her head slightly, curious. "Is there a problem?" she asked gently. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned to another security officer nearby, a broad-shouldered man with a badge that read Carlson. Carlson arrived with a heavy sigh and took the documents. "M. Norris," he read aloud. "But the passport says Maria Norris." "That's me," she said, still trying to smile. "Maira. I go by that. But my full name is Maria. Most systems abbreviate to M." Carlson didn't look convinced. "Doesn't match exactly," he said, flipping the passport over in his hand, as if expecting it to reveal something suspicious. "Might be a security flag." Maira's stomach turned slightly. She had traveled many times before, domestic, international, and this had never happened. "It's a very common abbreviation," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The airline must have shortened it. You can confirm my details." Carlson frowned. "Ma'am, step aside," she complied, stepping just outside the queue area. Other passengers shuffled past, a few glancing her way. Another officer arrived, clipboard in hand, younger and smug in expression. "We've got a mismatch," he asked too loudly. "Minor discrepancy," Carlson said. "Claims the ticket was issued with an abbreviation." The younger man peered at Maira. "Got any other ID?" Maira offered her driver's license. He barely glanced at it. "This could be fake." "What?" she said, startled now. "It's not fake. It's real. You can verify it with the DMV database if you want." He shook his head. "Don't get defensive. If you're legit, you've got nothing to worry about." Carlson's radio crackled. "Supervisor's on his way," he said, turning back to Maira. "Wait here." As she stood there, minutes stretched into long silences punctuated by sharp looks and hushed whispers between officers. The energy around her shifted. She could feel judgment clouding the air. A child holding a stuffed animal passed by and stared at her. His mother pulled him along more quickly. Finally, the supervisor arrived, a balding man in a pressed white shirt and too much aftershave. He barely acknowledged her. "What's the issue?" Carlson rattled off the mismatch name issue. The supervisor looked at Maira and raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, do you have a different ticket?" "No, I booked directly through the airline. Everything is here. Please, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I've flown before. I've never had this happen." He folded his arms. "We've had a lot of incidents recently. Can't take risks. You'll need to leave the terminal." Maira's heart thudded. "You're asking me to leave? Without even verifying my documents properly?" "Not asking. Telling," the supervisor said. "We don't have time for your explanations." A security guard stepped forward. Another placed his hand lightly on her arm, not aggressively, but enough to make her recoil instinctively. "I haven't done anything," she whispered. But her words were lost in the noise of the terminal. "I suggest you leave before we escalate this," said the young officer with the clipboard. Embarrassment flushed her cheeks. Her throat tightened. She tried to reason with them again, but their faces were already turned away. The decision had been made. Tears threatened to rise, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, She picked up her carry-on, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and began walking toward the exit. People stared. A few whispered. Someone pulled out their phone to record, hoping for some drama. Outside the terminal, the cool morning air hit her like a slap. The sun had risen higher now, turning the glass walls of the airport into gold and steel. She stepped aside to a bench, sat down slowly, and pulled out her phone. She typed a quick message. They kicked me out. Said my ID was fake. It took a moment, but the response came swiftly. Chuck Norris, I'm on my way. Just 4 words. Calm, direct, inevitable. Maira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She could almost hear the quiet shift in the universe, that subtle quiver in reality that happens when a force of nature is summoned. Inside the terminal, the staff resumed their duties as if nothing had happened. The young officer made a comment about weird travelers and chuckled. But miles away, Chuck Norris had changed course. The airport wouldn't know what hit them. Chuck Norris stepped out of the black SUV parked near the drop-off zone of Terminal B, wearing a brown leather jacket, dark jeans, and boots that thudded softly against the pavement. He didn't walk. He advanced, like a low-pressure storm system with purpose. His face, calm but unreadable, held the kind of quiet intensity that made even strangers lower their voices. Around him, no one quite recognized him at first, but they felt something powerful, something different. He entered the airport lobby and scanned the crowd. Then he saw her, Maira, sitting alone on a bench just outside the glass wall. She looked up, her expression folding into a tired smile. He gave her a nod and walked through the automatic doors. The moment he stepped into her line of vision, the tension in her shoulders loosened. You okay? He asked, voice low even. She stood, shook her head slightly. They said my ID didn't match. Wouldn't listen. Told me to leave. Chuck's jaw flexed, barely perceptible. Show me. She handed him the boarding pass and her passport. He looked at them, then turned them over again, as if affirming what he already knew. Text from the airline still shows your full name. They shortened it in the booking. Lazy system integration. I tried to explain. They didn't care, Maira replied. Chuck placed a hand on her shoulder. Wait here. Then he turned and walked back inside. At the security gate, the same smug guard with the clipboard spotted him first. He was mid-conversation with another officer, laughing about something on his phone, when he glanced up and froze. Chuck's presence landed like thunder in a clear sky. The guard blinked. Wait, is that? Before he could finish the sentence, Chuck was already at the counter. I need to speak to the supervisor on duty, Chuck said calmly. The guard stammered. Do you, have a boarding pass? No, I have a problem, Chuck said, locking eyes with him. And it concerns your staff. A young woman was removed from this terminal without just cause. I'm here to address it. The officer swallowed hard. Who was? Maira Norris, Chuck said, and let the name sit there. The other nearby staff started to whisper. A woman behind the kiosk nudged her colleague. One TSA agent muttered, That's Chuck Norris. Another looked like he was about to faint. The aura of recognition spread like wildfire, not in screams or fanfare, but in silent gulps, rigid postures, and a sudden, overwhelming sense that something very big was about to happen. The smug clipboard officer recovered enough to gesture toward the side. I'll get the supervisor, sir. Right away. Moments later, Supervisor Dalton returned, the same man who had dismissed Maira earlier. He didn't recognize Chuck at first, walking in with the same tired look of authority that had soured his face earlier. But then he got closer and paused. He began. Yes, Chuck said, and I'm here because your team made a mistake. Dalton tried to shift into corporate mode, the kind that hoped diplomacy could patch over anything. If there's been a misunderstanding, I'm sure we can. There was no misunderstanding, Chuck interrupted. Your staff refused to verify a passenger's valid ID, ignored her attempt to explain, and removed her from the terminal, publicly, without cause or investigation. That's not a policy issue. That's disrespect. Dalton's smile faltered. Around them, foot traffic had slowed. Travelers passed, staring. Phones subtly recorded. Even airport staff from other terminals peeked from behind counters. Chuck stepped closer. Not threatening, but precise. Now you're going to walk me through the process you used to decide that she was unfit to board her flight. Dalton stammered. Well, the ID didn't match. You mean the airline's automated name abbreviation? That mistake. Chuck held up the documents. Do you run a policy of zero tolerance for shortened names? Or just for passengers who don't push back? Carlson appeared from the security side, trying to back up his boss. We were just following protocol. No, Chuck cut in again. You weren't. Because protocol includes verifying against multiple forms of ID, which she offered. You chose not to look. That's not protocol. That's laziness. No one argued. Now, Chuck said, voice lowering, I want her rebooked, rescreened, and readmitted, and I want an apology. In writing. Signed. Delivered. Dalton looked at Carlson. Carlson looked at his feet. Clipboard boy had long since disappeared into the background. Chuck turned his head slightly. Or I can make a few calls. You'll be holding press conferences for the next month. No. That's not necessary, Dalton said quickly, sweat now forming at his hairline. We'll make this right. You'll make it better than right, Chuck said. You'll call her name over the intercom, escort her through security personally, and you'll hand her that apology before she boards. Or I will make this public. And you know how fast that goes. Dalton nodded, now fully cowed. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Consider it done. Chuck gave a final, cold glance toward the officers. Respect isn't optional. Not in uniforms. Not in authority. Then he turned and walked out, pausing at the doors to motion for Maira to come in. When she stepped back into the terminal beside him, there was a noticeable shift. The same passengers who had looked at her like a criminal earlier now watched her with quiet sympathy, even awe. The staff that had mocked her now stood straighter, avoided eye contact. She glanced at her father. Did you really just threaten to make it public? I didn't threaten, Chuck replied. I offered them a choice. Minutes later, her name was announced over the loudspeakers. Maira Norris, please proceed to Security Gate A. You're cleared for expedited boarding. The staff met her at the entrance. Carlson avoided eye contact. The supervisor gave her a sealed envelope, the apology letter, and stammered a few uncomfortable words. Chuck waited nearby, arms folded, unmoving. And then, as she passed through security for the second time, no one dared question her name again. The moment Maira stepped through security, things felt different. The air was the same, the terminal no less noisy, the crowd still flowing. But she had changed, or rather, the way people saw her had. The once judging eyes now avoided hers, or worse, sought contact, filled with guilt or a clumsy attempt at friendliness. Some of the staff wore forced smiles. Others busied themselves behind kiosks, pretending not to notice her. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her father walked a few paces behind her, calm, steady, and unmistakably present. The kind of presence that didn't fill a room, it quieted it. If Chuck Norris was a storm, he had now passed, but the thunder still echoed. A new gate agent, clearly pulled from another section, waited near her boarding gate. He greeted her with professionalism. No smugness, no hidden smirks, just a polite, sincere, Miss Norris, we're very sorry about what happened. Your flight has been rebooked, and we've upgraded your seat to first class. Thank you, she said, keeping her tone neutral. We'd also like to offer you a $500 travel voucher, he added, holding out a card. She took it without a word. From her peripheral vision, she could see the original officer, the smug one with the clipboard, watching from behind a pillar. He wasn't grinning anymore. His arms were crossed, lips pursed, eyes following her like a man watching the cost of a mistake land squarely on his head. They knew they had messed up. Chuck joined her by the boarding area, his gaze steady. You still want to go to Austin? Yeah, she said, then smiled faintly. More than ever. You'll do fine, he replied, his voice like solid ground. She nodded, but something inside her still churned. Not anger, not really. More like disbelief. That people could dismiss her so easily. That no one listened until her last name had weight behind it. As if reading her mind, Chuck added, You shouldn't have to be my daughter to be treated with respect. There it was. The truth. Exactly, she whispered. The gate agent approached again, more hesitantly this time. Mr. Norris, Miss Norris, The airport director has asked to meet with you before the flight, if you'd be willing. Chuck raised an eyebrow. I didn't ask for a meeting. He understands that, sir. But he'd like to speak. In person. Just 5 minutes. Maira looked at her father. Should we? Your call, he said. She thought about it, then nodded. Yeah, let's hear what he has to say. They were led down a side corridor into a small but well-appointed office behind the scenes of Terminal B. Inside sat a man in his early 50s, silver hair, tailored suit, posture perfect. The plaque on his desk read Gregory Weston, Director, Central Regional Airport Authority. He stood when they entered. Mr. Norris. Miss Norris. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Chuck remained standing. Maira sat slowly. Weston folded his hands on the desk. Let me begin by saying, what happened to you today was unacceptable. Maira raised her eyebrows, but said nothing. Weston continued. I reviewed the security footage. I reviewed the audio logs. And I spoke with the team leads. There is no question your ID was valid. Your explanation was clear. The fault was ours. She glanced at Chuck, then back at Weston. Why did they assume I was lying? I think, Weston said carefully, some of our younger staff are taught to be suspicious of anything that deviates from a perfect template. That's not an excuse. That's a failure in training, a failure in judgment, and, frankly, a failure in culture. Chuck gave a single nod, quiet but firm. You're not wrong. I want to offer a full, formal apology, Weston went on. And not just for you, for how we train our staff, for the systems we've let slip through without proper checks. That ends today. You're revising protocol? Maira asked. We're rewriting it, Weston said. As of this afternoon, every staff member who interacts with passengers will go through re-education. Not just on process, on respect, on listening, on reading situations with more humanity and less suspicion. Maira considered him. He didn't seem rehearsed. He seemed exhausted, as if this had shaken him, too. There's one more thing, Weston said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a black envelope. We've prepared a public apology, one that will be read over the terminal PA system in the next 30 minutes. No names, to protect your privacy, but the message will be clear. The airport failed a traveler today, and we own that failure. Chuck leaned slightly forward. You sure you're ready for the fallout? I'd rather weather a storm of truth than pretend it didn't rain, Weston said. Chuck actually smiled. Just slightly. They stood to leave. Weston extended his hand to Maira. She looked at it for a second, then shook it. Good luck in Austin, he said. And thank you for your patience. You didn't deserve what happened. But I hope we can prove we learned something from it. She nodded, a little of the bitterness lifting. We'll see. Back at the gate, people began boarding. As Maira stepped onto the jet bridge, a voice came over the speakers. Attention, travelers. Earlier today, a passenger was wrongly removed from this terminal due to errors in protocol and judgment. We acknowledge this mistake, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure it never happens again. Respect and fairness are not optional at our airport. We apologize sincerely. A ripple of murmurs passed through the terminal. Some passengers stopped mid-step. Others glanced at one another, uncertain. But Maira kept walking. On board, a flight attendant greeted her like she was royalty. Miss Norris, welcome. Your seat is just ahead, on the left. First class. She'd never flown it before. It wasn't something she would have asked for. But it wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about restoration. As she settled into her seat, Chuck paused beside her. I'm not coming with you, he said. You've got this. I know, she said softly. Text me when you land. I will. Then he leaned down, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, Next time, don't wait. Speak louder. She looked up at him. They wouldn't have listened. They will now. He turned and left the plane. The engines roared to life moments later. As the plane lifted off, Maira looked out the window. The terminal shrank below her, a distant collection of glass and steel. She didn't know if the apology broadcast reached every passenger. She didn't know if the staff would really change. But she knew she'd left something behind, something heavier than a suitcase. Her dignity, bruised, had been restored. And the next young woman who got stopped at that airport might be treated just a little better. All because someone finally listened,